This video is going to combine a lot of different things, and it's mainly about this book, Contrasts, or a parallel between the architecture of the 15th and 19th centuries by A.W. PEACEin, I believe. And this book was incredible. It stuck with me the first time I saw it. I saved it, put it aside, and now it's time to talk about it. I read a lot deeper into it and discovered some things I never even fathomed were the case. So it deals with a lot of differences between the architecture of the 15th century with the architecture of the 19th century, speaking very highly of that of the 15th century and developing and expressing reasons for why it's decline in the 19th century, which is kind of what we see today even more. Now, I mean, they aren't even trying anymore. It's all just glass and different other products and plastics and whatever. So even in the basically table of contents, the beginning of the book, they show a comparison to the older kind of style and then the newer style of advertising, even education, like even the way the border is of this advertisement just looks choppy and not very formal, whereas before it was all elaborate and so much deeper. And this kind of belittles it, talking about cheap materials, you know, what was the easiest way to do it, basically printing molds, things that barely had any value. It was just kind of like became a trade instead of an art form and a spiritual pathway and just a way of elaborating the miracles of the earth in an artistic, perfect way. It became something just stale, boring, and just kind of devoid of sanctity and sacredness and holiness, which was part of the goal. And this all seemed to kind of start around the time of Henry VIII. And we've heard a lot about Henry VIII in that song that gets repeated in movies like Ghost and all over the place, and people only hear of the wives usually that he had and a few other things. But this guy was a disaster. Even on Wikipedia, it mentions like a very small paragraph about basically what he did to desecrate the churches, shrines destroyed, and monasteries dissolved. A little tiny paragraph about that part of his life, and the rest of it basically talks about his wives and all these other things. But this book goes into it a little deeper and talks about how nasty this guy was and how deliberate he was in the ways that he basically destroyed monuments, pillaged treasures, took all the loot away, destroyed the sanctity and the holiness of all the holy people, made them flee to other countries, did so much that is just disturbing that I never knew about. So I'm going to read a couple clips here and then we'll talk about it a little more. So this book talks about how he accomplished this great change in a most artful manner by instituting commissioners for pretended reformation of ecclesiastical abuses, but in reality to accomplish the entire overthrow of the religious houses by forging accusations of irregularity against them and by executing those who opposed his intentions on the score of denying his supremacy. So this guy was just go around basically killing people, anyone that stood in his way, anyone that was trying to preserve something, he would kill them immediately, and that would be the end of it. It would put fear into the minds of everyone. And so he took over houses whose revenues were less than 300 marks a year, and by which he started basically taking over and destroying buildings. 376 conventional establishments were dissolved, and an immense number of religious persons were scattered abroad. There were a total number of monasteries, 645, colleges, 90, hospitals for poor men, 100, chantries and free chapels, 2,374, the whole of whose lands, together with an immense treasure of ecclesiastical ornaments of every description, were appropriated by this rapacious and sacrilegious tyrant to his own use, and the rightful possessors left utterly destitute. So he was just pillaging treasure, doing all kinds of different stuff, destroying churches, getting rid of all holy people, and just really basically creating a reset. This is what happens. This is how it gets done. Anybody that decides to go against it gets killed. And so one of the pages said, "The beauteous and precious ornaments which had enshrined the relics of the departed saints or served for centuries in the most solemn rites of the church sink in mere masses of metal under the fire of the crucible, their libraries pillaged, their archives destroyed, the very remains of their illustrious dead torn from their tombs and treated with barbarous indignity. So suddenly had all this been brought to pass that many buildings were hurled down ere the cement with which they were erected had hardened, with time, and many a mason, by the unwearied strokes of whose chisel some beautiful form had been wrought, lived to see the result of his labors mutilated by the axes of the destroyer. So any project that was in the works, any church that was being created, was stopped immediately. People that were actually the builders of some of the stuff were seeing their work get destroyed. They were seeing the new education come into being, and they were not liking it at all, but they couldn't do anything because they'd be threatened with death. And very similar to the way it still works today, the powers that be, the ones that are unseen pulling the strings, were the ones basically behind Henry VIII and his Edward VI, his successor, who basically was way too young. They were both way too young to do much, so people took over. People with terrible intentions took over, and everyone was seeing this happen, and they could do nothing about it. Basically, the media, everyone joined forces against the people, and they were just destroying it, especially the religious people, the people that were sacred and holy. They were treated the worst. The buildings were desecrated. Only a few remained. Bones were ground to dust. Basically, ornaments, everything was stolen. Treasure was just looted and pillaged, and Henry VIII could spend it so quickly that he was actually having trouble with money because somehow he was just so abusively greedy. And all this stuff is just happening in the matter of a couple of generations of reign, probably one generation, where these people are threatened to the point of death. So they don't speak about it, they don't talk about it, and then history is reset. People just get killed, nobody writes about it, it just keeps going. And then now we have the comparison of the buildings, which is very radically different. You can see that there's just, it's almost like an alien world. The ancient architecture is almost alien to us in how detailed and immaculate it is. And they compare it here to the stuff that for the 19th century, which is actually still pretty nice, but a lot weaker, made a lot differently, and just of a whole different purpose. They were actually talking about in the book too how they would take over certain churches that were allowed to stay, and they would revamp the entire inside, basically limiting the amount of people that could be in there, minimizing things, putting engine rooms, basically destroying other rooms that were designed for prayer and solitude, and they were putting them many other things in there, crowding them. And they were also told that this is when the time happened that the churches were basically closed a lot more frequently and the doors were locked. Now before, in the ancient religion, it said that the doors were basically always open except for maybe an hour or two out of the 24-hour day where people would basically clean up and fix the place. All other people were welcome at all times of day to come in and pray on their own. This was eliminated in here. The need for this religion and spiritual practice and faith exercises was being diminished. People's faith was being desecrated. They were taking heretical kind of scriptures from other parts of the world and introducing it into this area, and people were just not really receptive to it. If people, if they were getting persecuted for their religion and their beliefs, they would really kind of go into hiding, or just over time it would gradually get lost because they'd see no value in doing it. It was more of a threat and danger to practice of faith, and that's what ended up happening, and everything started to get belittled, and all the artifacts, all the treasures, all the meaningful symbolism, architecture just got ruined, and the education of this became a lot stale. They said that people were going to classes and doing things very repetitively. They weren't encouraged to look at the ancient cultures and see what was left. But yet, in all these towns, the few buildings that remain, even still today in Europe, the few buildings that remain from these eras in England are the most treasured places. They're the tourist spots. They're the places that people actually want to see. But yet, throughout time, there was just this desire to destroy all these for the future, to eradicate the thoughts. And the insides, look at the difference here. So much more elaborate, so much more acoustically perfect back in the day, so much more effort put into it, so much more pride put into it. And then nowadays it's totally different when you see some of the movie theaters and other theaters that are out there that are from this newer era, churches and different things now that are just in very shoddy conditions, and you don't see any monuments like this dedicated to anyone anymore. The elaborate effects and artistic expression are just not there. They've replaced it with just contemporary stuff that is nothing compared to the mastery that these artists were portraying for literally every aspect of life, whether it was religious or what else. But they started getting more mechanical as things got on and less spiritual. And these are some newer kind of comparisons and contrasts between some things that I found on the internet and other ones that I've kind of put together, which just show, a really big difference, in how architecture has changed over time and the purpose and the value of this. And so many things become parking lots, become just little grassy areas. Meanwhile, they could have been tourist spots forever. Like these powers that be, during these resets, even sacrificed the money that they would be making by control of these buildings just to eliminate that aspect of history and to preach something totally different. To preach that our ancient people were making things like Stonehenge when they were probably making things like this, castles, magnificent towers, unbelievable things. And the times have certainly changed. Our appreciation and our oneness and our love for what is really beautiful and divinely inspired has just gone to the wayside, and it really shouldn't. And I believe it may have started during this Henry VIII time. There's no telling how. That guy ransacked a lot of different countries, and that was probably their mission, to destroy as many of these buildings as possible. And another part of their thing was they would destroy the buildings so much, just be piles of rubble. They would kind of just inevitably turn into something different. People would put landfills on top of it, and they would just end up building something on it. Gardens would grow, and there would be no sign of this, but they're all hidden still underneath us, and maybe we'll discover them someday, and who knows. But Piranesi is another kind of person. He was that artist during around that time in the 1700s and whatnot, where he was kind of seeing this, as Henry VIII and this new religion's influence spread all over the place. They were just probably sending out missionaries and armies to destroy all these things. And thankfully, Piranesi was documenting the magnitude of them and the power of them, because all of these things, just after continuously getting chipped away, will just look like stone. They'll just look like rubble. They'll be buried in grass. They'll be buried in dirt. They'll be mud flooded or whatever, and they will be gone, and that's it. And the only thing we have left is the artworks to show us what we were capable of. And that is also something they tried to hide from everyone. The education system is swayed to not show the true power of our human ancestors and potential. We're meant to believe that these people from this era were way dumber than us. Our smartphones allow us to be geniuses compared to these dummies who were building these immaculate structures that we can't even come close to. Nor would anyone have the desire to put in the effort. These people, it was a part of their life. They were dedicating their lives to the creation, to this architecture. Architects were considered of a very high standard, a very high class, a very high quality of person, because it melds like the mechanical arts with the visual arts, structural arts, and it's absolutely essential for a civilization. There's no doubt about it. The respect for architecture has declined greatly, and I'm glad this guy in the contrast book points it out. And Piranesi here was looking at some of the ruins, and he was deducing what that building would have been like. And not many people were doing that, but there's an important need to do something like that, because otherwise some artist that's more popular would just come around and say, oh, this was nothing, this was just a Stonehenge-like thing. Meanwhile, it could have looked like this, could have been even higher. This could have been just a part. There could be a metal structure. These could have been covered in gold, could have been covered in art. That could have all been whitewashed off. They got rid of every kind of symbol they could. Anyone with power, like Henry VIII, would just sweep through Rome, Venice, everywhere, and just decimate whatever they don't want to continue. And they were not only another thing that was said in the books was that you'd think that they kept maybe the best ones, but they weren't. They had a very purpose designed to destroy the best ones and leave just some of the ones that would give us a hint, a taste of what happened before, kind of just to tease us. And that's what they are doing. They are teasing us with a history that we deserve to know, that we all want to know. We all really need to know it in order to progress as humanity really should, and get back to what's important and eliminate what isn't. And the things that are not important have taken over, and they've become dominant in our culture, and that's got to change. We got to bring the beauty back, the need for beauty, the love of beauty, the love of art, the love of creativity, the love of pushing your human understanding and consciousness boundaries. And really, maybe digging deeper, I think we really have to start a new archaeological trend that goes for some of these places, tries to find some of these things, and really tries to get to the bottom of who was creating it, Where was this ancient religion? How important was it? How powerful was it? What were they doing? What were they experiencing? Who was all about it? And and we need to eradicate the people from history that are responsible for eliminating this past. And those people need to be forgotten. They need to be considered monsters that they are. And we need to remember who truly helped us become what we are on this planet, because this place is amazing and there's so much we don't know, and I hope we figure it all out. Bless us all. Please, let's figure it out. So in conclusion, I'll read the conclusion from this book, and I recommend checking it out. It's from 1836. It's about 100 pages, and it's worth it. And so in conclusion, he states this: I own the attempt is a bold one. Books have generally been written and plates published to suit private and party views and interests, in consequence of which the truth has generally been woefully disguised, and flattery and falsehood replaced sincerity and reality. In this work I have been actuated by no other feelings but that of advancing the cause of truth over that of error. I feel acutely the fallen condition of the arts, when each new invention, each new proceeding seems only to plunge them deeper in degradation. I wish to pluck from the age the mask of superior attainments so falsely assumed, and I am anxious to direct the attention of all back to the real merit of past and better days. It is among their remains that excellence is only to be found, and it is by studying the zeal, talents, and feelings of these wonderful but despised times that art can be restored, or excellence regained. A. Welby Pugin. And this guy nails it. Just like in 1836, it's the same now. People are being threatened online and everywhere else for exposing flaws in science, in religion, in entertainment, in people. It's really sick. It's like you expose the evil and the evil ends up winning, and that is really what has to change. We have to bring the world back to a world based on love and connection with some divine spirit, and humble humility to something, so that you know not to do certain things. People have to be humbled by their creator, otherwise chaos kind of ensues. And people really need to get in touch with their art. Everyone needs to bring it back. They apparently, back in the day, they were just so much more connected to the spiritual realm than we have become. And there are obviously pockets of people who are, but I beg to believe that it's very different than it used to be, when the entire community would participate, hymns would be sung, people would feel it, everyone would resonate with the spiritual power of what they were capable of. Artisans all over the streets getting respect. It's a lot different than it is now. They tried to destroy and devalue everything that is beautiful and makes the human experience a miracle beyond comprehension. We've got to bring it all back, and we can't be afraid to say it. And I hope we all do. Everybody, I encourage you to attain your true power and worth, and just keep going for it. We will win. Have a great one. Bless you all.